When I opened the safe my husband left behind, I found 3 envelopes, one for each of our children. Each was empty, except the last one. It had just one sentence written inside. The one who betrayed her mother will receive this after she reads. My hands froze. My heart stopped. What did Richard mean? Which child? And what truth was I about to discover? Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Patterson, and I am 68 years old. For 43 years, I lived what I thought was a beautiful life. I was a devoted wife to Richard, my high school sweetheart, and a loving mother to 3 children who I believed were my greatest accomplishments. Claire, my eldest, became a successful lawyer. Thomas, my middle child, took over the family hardware business. And Emily, my baby, pursued her dreams as an artist. I was so proud of them. I thought I had done everything right. I spent my entire adult life in service to my family. I was the woman who woke up at 5 in the morning to pack lunches with handwritten notes of encouragement. I was the mother who sat through every soccer game, every piano recital, every parent-teacher conference, no matter how tired I was. I worked part-time jobs to help pay for college tuitions, and I stretched every dollar so my children could have opportunities Richard and I never had. I sewed Halloween costumes by hand, hosted elaborate birthday parties on a tight budget, and turned our modest home into a place filled with warmth and laughter. People in our neighborhood knew me as Sweet Margaret. I baked cookies for new families moving in. I volunteered at church fundraisers and organized community bake sales. I babysat for struggling single mothers and never asked for a dime. My roses won awards at the county fair, and my apple pie was legendary at every potluck. I never sought recognition or praise. Seeing my family happy was all the reward I needed. Richard and I built everything from nothing. We started with a small apartment and big dreams. He worked long hours at the hardware store until he could afford to buy it. I managed our home, raised our babies, and kept our family glued together through every storm. We were partners in every sense of the word. He was my rock, my best friend, and the love of my life. When Richard died suddenly from a heart attack 6 months ago, my world shattered into a million pieces. I cried myself to sleep every night, clutching his pillow, whispering to him in the darkness. But I told myself I still had my children. I still had my grandchildren. I still had the family we built together. They would take care of me the way I had always taken care of them. At least, that is what I believed. I had no idea that the people I loved most in this world had been plotting against me. I had no idea that my own children saw me not as their mother, but as an obstacle standing between them and money. I was about to discover that the family I sacrificed everything for had betrayed me in the most cruel and calculated way imaginable. After Richard's funeral, I tried my best to create a new routine for myself. The grief was overwhelming, like a heavy blanket I could not shake off, but I knew Richard would want me to keep going. Every morning, I woke up at 6 o'clock, made myself a cup of coffee the way Richard used to make it, strong with just a splash of cream, and sat by the kitchen window watching the sunrise. Those quiet moments were sacred to me. They reminded me that life continued, even when it felt like mine had stopped. My days followed a comforting rhythm that kept me grounded. After breakfast, I would tend to my rose garden, the one Richard had planted for our 20th wedding anniversary. He had spent an entire weekend digging and planting 12 rose bushes, one for each month we had dated before getting married, and one for each decade we had been together. I talked to those roses like they could hear me. I told them about my day, about the grandchildren, about how much I missed their gardener. Caring for them made me feel close to Richard, like he was still there with me in some small way. In the afternoons, I organized our family photo albums. Boxes and boxes of memories sat in the spare bedroom, and I had promised myself I would finally put them in order. I spent hours looking at pictures of birthday parties, family vacations, Christmas mornings and graduations. Claire in her cap and gown, beaming with pride. Thomas covered in dirt after his first Little League game. Emily with paint smudged on her cheek at her first art show. Those photos reminded me of everything I had worked for, everything that had made my life meaningful. Sundays were my favorite day of the week. That was when the whole family gathered for dinner, a tradition Richard and I had started when the children were small. I would spend all of Saturday preparing the meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and my famous apple pie. The house would fill with the smell of home cooking, and for a few hours everything felt normal again. Claire would arrive with her husband, always dressed impeccably and carrying a bottle of wine. Thomas would come with his wife and their 2 children, my precious grandchildren who would run through the house with wild energy. And Emily, my free-spirited youngest, would bring handmade gifts: a painted vase, a ceramic bowl, a watercolor portrait. We would sit around the dining room table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals, and talk about our weeks. The grandchildren would tell me about school. Claire would share stories from her law firm. Thomas would update us on the hardware business. Emily would talk about her latest art projects. I would listen, smile, and feel grateful that even though Richard was gone, I still had this. I still had my family close by. I still had love surrounding me. The safe in Richard's study remained locked and forgotten. He had mentioned it years ago, telling me it contained important documents for when the time comes, but I had never given it much thought. The lawyer had reminded me about it after the funeral, saying I should open it when I was ready. But I was not ready. Opening that safe felt like closing a final chapter on Richard's life, and I was not prepared to do that yet. I wish now that I had opened it sooner. I wish I had known what Richard was trying to protect me from. The first crack in my perfect illusion appeared 3 weeks after Richard's funeral. It was a Sunday morning, and I was preparing dinner as usual, humming along to the old jazz records Richard loved. I had made extra dessert because Emily had mentioned she wanted to bring a friend to meet the family. But at noon, my phone rang. It was Emily, and her voice sounded strange, distant, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but I can't make it today. I have this gallery showing I completely forgot about, and the owner is counting on me to be there." Her words tumbled out quickly, leaving no room for me to respond. I felt a small pang of disappointment, but tried to understand. "Of course, sweetheart. Your career is important. We can celebrate another time." But something in her tone bothered me. Emily had never missed a Sunday dinner, not even when she was struggling to make ends meet as a new artist. Family always came first for her, or at least it used to. The following Sunday, Emily called again with another excuse, and the Sunday after that. Each time, her voice carried that same distant quality, like she was reading from a script. I told myself she was just busy, that I was being an overprotective mother, but doubt began to creep into my mind during the quiet evening hours when I sat alone in the house that suddenly felt too big. Then something else happened that I could not ignore. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Claire and Thomas had both come over for dinner. I was in the kitchen preparing coffee when I heard them talking in hushed voices in the dining room. Their tone was serious, urgent even. I walked toward them with the coffee pot, and the moment they saw me, they stopped mid-sentence. The silence was deafening. "Everything okay, you two?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and casual. My heart fluttered with an unease I could not quite name. Claire's face transformed instantly into a bright smile, but it did not reach her eyes. "Of course, Mom. Just talking about some boring business stuff with the hardware store. Nothing for you to worry about." Thomas nodded quickly, too quickly, and took a long sip of his water. "Yeah, just inventory and supplier issues. Really dull stuff." But I knew my children better than anyone in this world. I had raised them, nursed them through illnesses, celebrated their victories, and comforted them through their failures. I could read their faces like books I had, written myself. And right now, those faces were hiding something from me. The way Claire's eyes darted to Thomas, the way Thomas's jaw tensed, the way both of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Something was wrong. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Richard's side of the bed felt cold and empty. I reached over and touched his pillow, wishing desperately that he was there to talk to reassure me that I was just being paranoid. Am I imagining things? I whispered into the darkness, but the house offered no answers, only the sound of my own worried breathing. A small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was coming, something I was not prepared for. I pushed it away, telling myself that grief was making me see shadows where there were none. My children loved me. They would never hide anything important from me. But the doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to grow roots. I woke up the next morning determined to push away the uncomfortable thoughts that had kept me awake most of the night. Grief does strange things to people, I told myself while making breakfast. It makes you paranoid, suspicious, and see problems where none exist. My children were busy adults with their own lives, careers, and responsibilities. Of course they would have private conversations. Of course Emily would have work commitments. I was reading too much into innocent situations because I was lonely and missing Richard. I threw myself into my daily routines with renewed energy, as if staying busy could silence the whispers of doubt in my mind. I deep cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that were already spotless and organizing closets that were already neat. I baked 3 different types of cookies and delivered them to neighbors, forcing myself to smile and chat about the weather and upcoming community events. I volunteered extra hours at the church, folding bulletins and arranging flowers for Sunday service. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind occupied. When Claire called to check on me, I made sure my voice sounded cheerful and light. "I'm doing wonderful, sweetheart, just keeping busy. You know me, I can't sit still for long." She seemed relieved, and we chatted about her latest case at the law firm. Everything felt normal again, and I scolded myself for ever doubting her. This was my daughter, the little girl I had rocked to sleep every night, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. She would never deceive me. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping to find Claire in Richard's study. She was going through his desk drawers, pulling out papers and examining them carefully. My stomach tightened, but I forced a calm smile onto my face. "Looking for something, honey?" I asked from the doorway, trying to sound casual. Claire jumped slightly, clearly startled, but recovered quickly with a practiced smile. "Oh, Mom, I didn't hear you come in. I was just looking for some old tax documents Dad mentioned before he passed. He said something about a deduction we might have missed. Don't worry about it, just boring legal stuff." Her explanation sounded reasonable, perfectly logical even. I nodded and offered to help her look, but she quickly declined. "No need, Mom. I found what I needed. You just relax." She gathered the papers, kissed my cheek, and left within minutes. I stood in the study afterward, staring at the slightly disorganized desk. Richard had always been meticulous about his filing system. Why would Claire need to search through everything if he had told her exactly where something was? I pushed the thought away. She was a lawyer. She dealt with documents all day. This was normal. Thomas started calling more frequently, always with questions about finances. "Mom, do you know where Dad kept the homeowner's insurance policy? What about the deed to the house? Did he have any investment accounts I should know about?" Each time I answered his questions patiently, telling myself he was just being a responsible son, making sure everything was in order after his father's death. "Your father would be proud of you for taking charge like this," I told him warmly, patting his hand during one of his visits. But late at night, when the house settled into silence and I was alone with my thoughts, the doubts crept back in like uninvited guests. Why were they asking so many questions about money and property? Why did they seem more interested in Richard's documents than in how I was coping with his loss? Why did their eyes avoid mine when I asked them simple questions? I would shake my head against the pillow, angry at myself for these terrible thoughts. These were my babies, the children I had sacrificed everything for. They loved me. I had to believe that. I had to. 2 months had passed since Richard's death, and I finally decided it was time to open the safe in his study. I had been avoiding it, treating it like Pandora's box, something that once opened could never be closed again. But the lawyer had called again, gently reminding me that there were important documents inside that needed to be reviewed for the estate. I could not put it off any longer. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. The house was empty, filled only with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stood in front of the safe with the combination the lawyer had given me, my hands trembling slightly as I turned the dial. Left to 23, right to 7, left to 42. The lock clicked, and I pulled open the heavy door. Inside, the safe was organized exactly how Richard would have kept it. Neat folders, labeled envelopes, and stacks of important papers arranged by category. There were property deeds, insurance policies, birth certificates, and our marriage license. Seeing Richard's careful handwriting on the labels made my eyes well up with tears. Even in death, he was still taking care of me, still making sure everything was in order. Then I saw them. 3 sealed envelopes sitting on top of everything else, impossible to miss. Each one had a name written in Richard's distinct handwriting: Claire, Thomas, Emily. My heart began to pound. Why would Richard leave separate letters for each of our children? Why had he never mentioned these to me? I carefully lifted them out of the safe, holding them like they were made of glass. The envelopes were identical in size, plain white with no decoration, just the names written in black ink. I held them up to the light streaming through the study window, trying to see inside without opening them. They were Richard's final words to his children, and I felt like I would be violating something sacred by reading them. These were meant for Claire, Thomas, and Emily, not for me. I decided to call Claire and tell her about the discovery. Surely she would want to know that her father had left her something personal. I dialed her number, my fingers still clutching the envelopes. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" Her voice sounded busy, distracted. "Claire, honey, I finally opened your father's safe today. He left letters for you, Thomas, and Emily. I thought maybe we could have a special family dinner this weekend, and I could give them to you then." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, longer than felt natural. When Claire spoke again, her voice had changed completely. It was sharp, almost aggressive. "Don't open them, Mom. Actually, don't do anything with them. I'll come pick them up tomorrow, all 3 of them. I'll make sure Thomas and Emily get theirs." The urgency in her tone sent alarm bells ringing through my entire body. "But Claire, they're addressed to each of you individually. I thought—" She cut me off. "Mom, just leave them alone, okay? I'll handle it. I have to go. I'm in a meeting." The line went dead before I could say another word. I stood there in Richard's study, staring at the phone in my hand, my heart racing. Why was Claire so insistent? Why did she sound almost panicked? What could possibly be in these letters that would make her react that way? I looked down at the envelopes again, and this time I held them up to the light more carefully. 2 of them, Claire's and Thomas's, felt completely empty. There was nothing inside at all, but Emily's envelope had weight to it, something inside. My hands began to shake as I carefully ran my finger under the seal, breaking it open. Inside was a single piece of folded paper. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, and the words I read made my blood run cold and my legs nearly give out beneath me. The paper shook in my hands as I read Richard's words over and over, unable to believe what I was seeing. "The one who betrayed her mother will receive this after she reads the truth about what she did to her own family. The evidence is in the blue folder locked in my office drawer. Margaret, my love, I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to handle it myself, but time ran out. Please protect yourself. They will come for everything we built. I love you forever. Richard." My vision blurred with tears. My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. Richard had known something. He discovered something terrible and tried to protect me, but his heart gave out before he could tell me the truth. What evidence? What betrayal? And which child had done this? The note said Emily would receive this letter, but what did that mean? With legs that felt like they might collapse at any moment, I stumbled to Richard's desk. My hands fumbled with the drawer keys hanging on the small hook underneath. I had never looked in this particular drawer. Richard had always kept it locked, and I had respected his privacy. But now I understood why. He had been protecting me from a truth too painful to face. The blue folder was exactly where he said it would be, tucked beneath some old business files. I pulled it out and sat down heavily in Richard's leather chair, the same chair where he had sat thousands of times, managing our finances and planning our future. I opened the folder, and my entire world crumbled into dust. Bank statements, dozens of them, with transactions highlighted in yellow marker by Richard's careful hand. Our joint savings account, the one we had spent 40 years building, showed withdrawal after withdrawal. $50,000 here, $30,000 there, $20,000, $15,000. The amounts varied, but they were all coded the same way. Transfer to E. Patterson personal account. Emily, my baby girl, my youngest daughter. Over $200,000 was gone. Gone. Money that Richard and I had saved penny by penny, sacrificed for, worked overtime for, denied ourselves luxuries for. Money meant to protect us in our old age, to ensure we would never be a burden to our children. And Emily had stolen it. Not borrowed, stolen. Because every withdrawal had a forged signature, my signature. Richard had paper-clipped examples of my real signature next to the forged ones. The differences were subtle but undeniable. But there was more, much more. Email printouts filled the rest of the folder, and each one was worse than the last. Emails between Emily and Richard from over a year ago. She had been begging him for money, claiming she needed it for her art career, for a gallery showing, for supplies and studio rent. Richard had refused at first, telling her she needed to learn to manage money responsibly. Then the emails turned manipulative. "Dad, I'm your daughter. Don't you want to see me succeed? Mom would understand. She always believed in my dreams." And then, after Richard got sick, the tone changed entirely. "Dad, you're not well. Let me help manage things for you and Mom. You can trust me. I'll take care of everything." The last email made me physically ill. It was dated 3 weeks before Richard died. Emily had convinced him to meet with a lawyer, not Claire, but someone Emily had found, to discuss changing his will. Richard's response was the last email in the chain. "Emily, I hired an investigator. I know about the gambling. I know about the debts. I know you've been lying to me and forging your mother's signature. We need to talk about this face to face, and you need to tell your mother the truth, or I will." There was no response from Emily after that. 1 week later, Richard had his fatal heart attack. I sat frozen in that chair, the papers scattered across the desk, my heart shattered into a million pieces. My daughter was a thief, a liar, a manipulator who had stolen from her dying father and forged her own mother's signature. But the horror did not end there, because paper clipped to the back of the folder was one more document that destroyed what was left of my breaking heart. It was a printed group text conversation between all 3 of my children. My hands trembled violently as I read the text messages Richard had somehow obtained and printed. The date at the top showed they were from 5 months ago, just 1 month before Richard died. The conversation made me feel like I was drowning, gasping for air that would not come. "Thomas, we need to talk about Emily's situation. This is getting out of control." Claire, "I know. Dad called me yesterday. He knows about the forged signatures. He's furious." Emily, "Please don't let him tell Mom. I'll fix this. I swear, I just need more time." Thomas, "More time? You've stolen over $200K from them. How exactly are you going to fix this?" Claire, "Everyone calm down. We need to think strategically here. If Dad goes to the police, Emily goes to prison. That destroys our family reputation and my career." Emily, I have a gambling problem, okay? I admitted it. I'm getting help. But if this comes out, I lose everything. Thomas. What about what Mom loses? She has no idea her savings are gone. Claire. Which is exactly why we need to control this situation. Here's what I'm thinking. The house and the business are worth over $1 million combined. Dad's not going to live forever, especially with his heart condition. If we can convince him to restructure the estate properly, we can make sure Mom is taken care of and cover Emily's debt. I stopped reading. I had to read that last message again because my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Claire, my eldest daughter, the one I trusted most, was calculating her father's death into her financial planning. I forced myself to continue. Thomas. That feels wrong, Claire, really wrong. Claire. What feels wrong is letting Emily's stupidity destroy everything Dad built. Look, we stay quiet about the theft. Emily agrees to split everything 3 ways after Mom passes. We make sure the house goes into a family trust that we control, not Mom. She's already showing signs of forgetfulness anyway. Emily. I never said Mom was forgetful. Claire. She doesn't need to be. We just need Dad to believe she might need help managing things eventually. I can draft the documents. It's what I do. Thomas. And what about Mom? Just let her think everything is fine? Claire. Mom will be fine. She'll have the house to live in and we'll take care of her. But we control the assets. This protects everyone. Emily. If you both agree to stay quiet about what I did, I'll agree to whatever you want. Just please don't tell Mom. It would kill her. Thomas. Fine, but Emily, you get help for the gambling or the deal is off. Claire. Agreed. And we move quickly on the estate restructuring before Dad changes his mind about anything. The printout continued with more messages over the following weeks. Plans to convince Richard to sign new documents. Discussions about which nursing homes had the best reputations in case they needed to help Mom transition to assisted living sooner rather than later. Thomas researching real estate developers interested in buying commercial properties in our area. Claire drafting trust documents that would give the 3 of them complete control over everything Richard and I owned. Then I found the private investigator's report, dated 2 weeks before Richard's death. It laid out everything in brutal detail. Emily had gambling debts totaling $340,000 spread across multiple casinos and online betting sites. She had been lying about her art career for over 2 years. Most of her gallery showings were fabricated stories to explain why she needed money. The investigation included photos of Emily at casinos, transaction records, and statements from creditors who were threatening legal action. But the most damning part of the report was the surveillance on Claire and Thomas. The investigator had followed them to meetings with estate attorneys, real estate developers, and financial advisors. All of this happening while Richard was sick, while I was caring for him, day and night, completely unaware that my children were circling like vultures, planning how to divide up our lives before we were even gone. There was a handwritten note from Richard paper-clipped to the final page. Margaret, I confronted them 1 week ago. They denied everything and told me I was paranoid because of my medication. But I have proof. I've secured everything I could to protect you. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to finish handling this myself. I'm so sorry, my love. Please be strong. Get a lawyer. Don't trust them. Any of them. I collapsed forward onto the desk, my body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. These were not my children. The babies I had raised, the ones I had loved unconditionally, could not be capable of this level of cruelty and calculation. But the evidence was irrefutable, documented in their own words. They had not only known about Emily's theft, they had turned it into an opportunity to take everything Richard and I had worked our entire lives to build. I do not know how long I sat at that desk, sobbing until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. The sun moved across the sky, casting long shadows through the study window, but I could not move. I could not think. I could only feel the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest until I thought I might suffocate from the pain. Eventually, I stumbled out of the study and up the stairs to my bedroom, clutching the blue folder against my chest like it was the only real thing left in my world. I collapsed onto the floor beside my bed, surrounded by the evidence of my children's treachery, and wept with a grief that was somehow worse than when Richard died. At least when Richard passed, I had believed I still had my children. I had believed love still surrounded me. Now I had nothing. I was utterly, completely alone. I looked at the photographs on my nightstand through blurred vision. Claire at her law school graduation, her arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. I remembered working 3 jobs that year to help with her tuition when her scholarship did not cover everything. I remembered staying up with her the night before her bar exam, making her favorite soup and telling her how proud her father and I were. That girl in the photograph loved me, or so I thought. When had she stopped? When had I become nothing more than an obstacle to her, an elderly woman whose forgetfulness could be exaggerated and exploited? I picked up another photo. Thomas on his wedding day, dancing with me at the reception. He had whispered in my ear, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I wouldn't be here without you." I had cried tears of joy that day. I remembered mortgaging our house to help him start the hardware business when every bank had turned him down. Richard and I had taken that risk because we believed in our son, because we wanted him to have opportunities we never had. And now he was meeting with developers to sell that same business, the one built on our sacrifice, the moment I was no longer useful. The photograph of Emily hurt the most. It was from her first art show, and she was holding a painting she had made for me, a portrait of our family sitting around the dinner table. She had titled it, "The Love That Built Me." I had hung that painting in the living room, treasuring it as proof that my sacrifices had meant something. Now I understood it was just another performance, another manipulation. While she painted pictures of family love, she was forging my signature and draining the accounts Richard and I had built over 40 years of marriage. I pulled myself up onto the bed and curled into a ball, hugging Richard's pillow to my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered to him, as if he could hear me from wherever he was now. "Why did you try to handle this alone?" But I knew why. Richard had been trying to protect me, trying to shield me from this unbearable pain. He had probably hoped he could fix it, make Emily return the money, convince our other children to do the right thing. But his heart had given out before he could save me from the truth. The memories flooded through me like a cruel slideshow I could not stop. Every sacrifice suddenly felt meaningless, every moment of joy now tainted with the knowledge that it had been built on lies. I remembered Claire as a little girl, climbing into my lap when she had nightmares, telling me I was her hero. I remembered Thomas bringing me dandelions from the yard, his face covered in dirt, saying they were more beautiful than roses because he picked them himself. I remembered Emily's first word, "Mama," and how my heart had exploded with love. Where had those children gone? When had they been replaced by these strangers who looked at me and saw nothing but money and property? When had my love become worthless to them? I replayed every recent conversation, every smile, every hug, and realized it had all been theater. They were performing the role of loving children while secretly counting down the days until they could take everything. The betrayal was not just about the money, though that was devastating enough. It was the casual cruelty of their planning, the cold calculation in their text messages, the ease with which they discussed putting me in a nursing home or exploiting my supposed forgetfulness. I was not a person to them anymore. I was an inconvenience, an elderly woman standing between them and their inheritance. I cried until I had no tears left, until my body was exhausted and my mind was numb. The bedroom grew dark as night fell, but I did not turn on the lights. I lay there in the darkness, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. At 68 years old, after dedicating every breath to my family, I had been reduced to nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. But as the hours passed and the numbness began to fade, something else started to grow in the hollow space where my heart used to be. It started as a tiny spark, barely noticeable. Then it grew hotter, brighter, more intense. It was anger, pure, righteous fury that burned away the grief and replaced it with something harder, something stronger. They had gambled on my weakness, on my unconditional love, on my willingness to forgive anything. They had made a terrible miscalculation. They had forgotten that mothers do not just nurture, we also protect. And right now, I needed to protect myself from the monsters I had raised. I woke the next morning with swollen eyes and a pounding headache, but also with a clarity I had not felt in months. The crushing grief from the night before had crystallized into something sharp and focused. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. My face was pale and drawn, my eyes red-rimmed and tired. But there was something new in those eyes, a steel determination that had not been there before. I walked to Richard's side of the bed and picked up the framed photograph of us on our wedding day. We were so young, so full of hope and dreams. "You tried to protect me," I whispered to his frozen smile. "You gathered all this evidence. You confronted them. You did everything you could. Now it's my turn to finish what you started. I won't let them win. Richard, I promise you that." I got dressed with deliberate care, choosing a navy blue dress that Richard had always said made me look strong and elegant. I brushed my hair, applied a little makeup to cover the worst of the damage from crying, and forced myself to eat breakfast even though food tasted like ash in my mouth. I needed my strength. I needed to be sharp and clear-headed for what came next. Sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen, I began to make a list. Years of managing a household and raising 3 children had taught me how to organize and plan. This situation required the same methodical approach I had used to coordinate school schedules, plan birthday parties, and stretch a tight budget to feed a growing family. Except now, instead of planning for my children's happiness, I was planning to protect myself from their greed. First item on the list, I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in estate law and elder abuse. Someone who could not be intimidated or manipulated by Claire's legal credentials. Someone who would fight as fiercely for me as I had always fought for my family. The irony was not lost on me that I needed protection from the very people I had spent my life protecting. Second, I needed to secure all the evidence, make copies of everything in the blue folder, and store them in multiple locations where my children could not access or destroy them. Richard had been smart to document everything, but I needed to ensure his work was not in vain. Third, I needed someone I could trust completely, someone who was on my side. My mind immediately went to my sister Helen. We'd not spoken much since Richard's funeral. I had been so wrapped up in my grief and then in the shock of discovery. But Helen had always been honest and direct, sometimes brutally so. She would tell me the truth and stand by me no matter what. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed Helen's number. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Margaret, is everything okay?" The concern in her voice almost broke my resolve, almost made the tears start again. But I took a deep breath and steadied myself. "Helen, I need your help, and I need you to keep a secret. Can you come over? Today? Right now, if possible?" There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the worry deepening in her voice. "Of course. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Margaret, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I can't explain over the phone. Just please come. And Helen, don't tell anyone you're coming here. Not anyone." I hung up before she could ask more questions. While I waited for Helen, I went back to Richard's study and carefully removed every document from the blue folder. I laid them out on his desk and used his scanner to make digital copies, emailing them to an address I created specifically for this purpose. Then I made physical copies using the printer, organizing them into 3 identical folders. One would stay with me. One would go to Helen, and one would go to my lawyer once I found one. When the doorbell rang exactly 28 minutes later, I opened it to find Helen standing there with a concerned expression and a bag of groceries. "I stopped and got ingredients for your favorite tea and some comfort food just in case," she said, hugging me tightly. The moment her arms wrapped around me, I nearly collapsed. Having someone on my side, someone who loved me without ulterior motives, was almost too much to bear. "Come in," I said quietly, leading her to the kitchen. "What I'm about to tell you is going to shock you. It's going to make you angry, but I need you to hear all of it before you react, okay?" Helen set down the groceries and took my hands in hers, her eyes searching my face. "Margaret, you're frightening me. Just tell me what happened." So I did. I told her everything. I showed her every document, every text message, every piece of evidence that Richard had collected. I watched her face transform from confusion to horror to absolute fury. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, her hands clenched into fists on the table. "Those ungrateful, greedy vultures," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "After everything you did for them, after everything you sacrificed, how dare they treat you like this?" Then she looked at me with fierce determination. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to destroy them legally, financially, and socially. They want to play games with your life? They're about to learn that you don't mess with the Patterson women." For the first time since opening that safe, I felt a spark of hope. I was not alone. I had an ally. And together we were going to make sure my children understood exactly what they had done. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had assumed my love made me blind. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Helen and I spent the next 3 days working with military precision. We operated in complete secrecy, meeting at her house rather than mine in case any of my children decided to drop by unannounced. Every move we made was calculated, deliberate, and documented. If my children had taught me anything through their betrayal, it was the importance of having ironclad evidence. Our first priority was securing the documents. Helen took one complete set of copies to her house and locked them in her own safe. I took another set to my bank and placed them in a safety deposit box that only I could access. The third set went to my dear friend Patricia, a woman I had known since our children were in elementary school together. Patricia was shocked and heartbroken when I told her what was happening, and she agreed immediately to safeguard the evidence. "If anything happens to you, Margaret, I'll make sure the truth comes out," she promised, hugging me tightly. Next came finding the right lawyer. Helen had done research and found Daniel Morrison, an estate attorney with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in cases involving elder financial abuse and family inheritance disputes. His reviews online were filled with phrases like "pit bull in the courtroom" and "does not back down." He had successfully prosecuted several cases against family members who had exploited elderly parents. He was exactly what I needed. The consultation appointment was scheduled for the following Monday. Helen insisted on coming with me for moral support. When we sat down in Daniel's office and I laid out the blue folder in front of him, I watched his expression change from professional interest to genuine outrage. He spent 2 hours reviewing every document, asking detailed questions, and taking extensive notes. "Mrs. Patterson," he finally said, leaning back in his chair and shaking his head in disbelief. "This is one of the most comprehensive cases of elder financial abuse and conspiracy I have seen in my 25 years of practice. Your husband documented everything perfectly. We have forged signatures, email evidence of conspiracy, proof of theft, and documented planning to exploit you. This is not just a civil matter. This borders on criminal fraud." My hands trembled as I absorbed his words. "What can we do?" I asked quietly. Daniel's eyes hardened with determination. "We can destroy them legally. Your daughter Emily committed felony forgery and theft. Your other 2 children were accessories after the fact by concealing her crimes and conspiring to defraud you of your estate. We can pursue criminal charges, civil restitution, and ensure they never see a penny of your inheritance. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted them to face the truth publicly, in front of everyone who had watched me raise them with love and devotion. I wanted them to be exposed not in a courtroom full of strangers, but in front of the community that knew our family. Daniel listened carefully as I explained my idea, and a slight smile crossed his face. "Mrs. Patterson, that is brilliant. It's unconventional, but it's perfectly legal, and it will be far more impactful than a court judgment they could hide from their friends and neighbors." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with strategic thinking. "Here's what we'll do. We'll prepare all the legal documents in advance. Criminal complaints, civil suits, everything ready to file. But before we file anything, you'll have your moment, your public exposure, and I'll be there as a witness to everything that's said." Over the next 2 weeks, Helen and I planned every detail of what I was calling Richard's Memorial Dinner. I sent formal invitations to all 3 of my children and their spouses, explaining that I wanted to have a proper celebration of Richard's life 6 months after his passing. The invitations were warm and loving, written in the tone of the old Margaret they thought they knew. "Please join me for a family dinner to honor your father's memory and share stories about the man who meant everything to us all." Claire responded immediately, saying she would be there. Thomas called to confirm, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting. Emily took 2 days to respond, and I could hear the nervousness in her text message, but she agreed to come. None of them suspected anything. Why would they? As far as they knew, I was still the naive, trusting mother who believed their lies. But I also invited others. My sister Helen, of course, Patricia and her husband, our pastor, Reverend James, who had known our family for 30 years, several close neighbors who had watched my children grow up, my friend Dorothy from the church volunteer committee. I wanted witnesses. I wanted people who knew the truth about what kind of mother I had been, what kind of sacrifices I had made. The most important preparation was the envelopes. I took 3 large manila envelopes and filled each one with copies of the relevant evidence. Claire's envelope contained the text messages, where she planned to manipulate her father's estate and discussed my supposed forgetfulness. Thomas's envelope held the surveillance photos of his meetings with real estate developers and his messages about selling the family business. Emily's envelope was the thickest, bank statements showing every forged withdrawal, the private investigator's report about her gambling addiction, and the emails where she manipulated her dying father. I also installed a small recording device in the dining room, hidden among the decorative items on the sideboard. Everything that was said during this dinner would be documented. Daniel had advised me that recordings made in my own home were legal, and they might prove useful if my children tried to deny anything afterward. The night before the dinner, I barely slept. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would handle their reactions, what I would do if they tried to leave or turn the situation around on me. Helen called me 3 times to make sure I was okay. "Margaret, you don't have to do this," she said during the last call. "We can just file the legal papers and let the courts handle it." But I did have to do this. For Richard. For myself. For every mother who had been betrayed by the children she loved. "I'm ready," I told Helen with a certainty I truly felt. Tomorrow, they're going to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake they ever made. The day of the dinner arrived with crisp autumn weather and golden afternoon light streaming through my windows. I woke early, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. There would be no turning back after tonight. Everything would change forever. I got dressed in the navy dress Richard had always loved, the one that made me feel strong. I applied my makeup carefully, wanting to look composed and dignified for what was coming. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The broken, weeping woman from 2 weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone ready for battle. I spent the morning cooking Richard's favorite recipes: roast beef with herbs, scalloped potatoes, green beans almondine, and his beloved apple pie. The familiar rituals of cooking calmed my nerves and gave my hands something to do. The irony was not lost on me that I was preparing a feast for the very people who had plotted against me. But this was strategic. I wanted everything to appear normal, loving, and nostalgic. I wanted them comfortable and unsuspecting. Helen arrived at 3 o'clock to help with final preparations. She squeezed my hand tightly as we set the table with the good china, the wedding pattern Richard and I had chosen 43 years ago. At each of my children's seats, we placed the manila envelopes positioned like place cards. They looked innocent enough, and I knew my children would assume they contained sentimental items or perhaps copies of family photos. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Helen asked me quietly as we worked. Her eyes were full of concern and love. I nodded firmly. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They need to face what they've done, Helen. Not in some sterile courtroom months from now, but here in the home where I raised them, in front of people who know the truth about our family. The guests began arriving at 5:30. Pastor Reverend James came first, his warm smile genuine as he hugged me. "Margaret, it's wonderful that you're doing this. Richard would be so pleased to see the family gathered in his honor." Patricia and her husband arrived next, followed by Dorothy and two of my longtime neighbors, the Hendersons. Each of them had known my children since they were small. Each had witnessed my devotion as a mother. Their presence here tonight was essential. At 6 o'clock sharp, Claire's car pulled into the driveway. I watched through the window as she stepped out, dressed impeccably in a designer suit, her lawyer's armor. She walked to the door with confidence, completely unaware of what awaited her inside. When I opened the door, she kissed my cheek with a practiced smile. "Mom, the house smells amazing. You went all out." "Only the best to honor your father," I replied, my voice steady and warm. She had no idea that every word I spoke now was calculated, every smile a mask hiding my true intentions. Thomas arrived 10 minutes later with his wife and children. The grandchildren ran to hug me, and I held them tight, wondering if this would be the last time I would see them for a long while. The thought brought a flash of pain, but I pushed it down. Their father had made his choices. The consequences were his to bear. Emily was the last to arrive, and I could see the nervousness radiating from her the moment she walked through the door. Her eyes darted around, taking in all the guests, clearly surprised by how many people were here. "Mom, I didn't realize this was going to be such a big gathering," she said quietly, her voice uncertain. "Your father touched many lives," I replied simply. It seemed right to have the people who loved him here, to remember him properly. She nodded but did not quite meet my eyes. Some part of her sensed danger, but she could not have imagined the magnitude of what was coming. As everyone gathered in the living room for pre-dinner conversation, I played my role perfectly. I laughed at stories about Richard, passed around appetizers I had made, and acted every bit the gracious, loving hostess and mother they all expected me to be. Claire, Thomas, and Emily were relaxed now, joking with each other and reminiscing about childhood memories. They thought they were safe. They thought they had gotten away with everything. At 7 o'clock, I invited everyone to the dining room. "Please, everyone, find your seats. Let's eat and celebrate Richard's life properly." I watched as my children noticed the envelopes at their places. Claire picked hers up curiously. Thomas raised an eyebrow at his. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she touched hers. "What are these, Mom?" Thomas asked casually, assuming they were sentimental keepsakes. I took my seat at the head of the table, the place that had been Richard's for so many years, and looked at each of my children in turn. My voice, when I spoke, was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "Those envelopes contain something your father wanted you to have. He spent the last months of his life gathering what's inside them. Before we eat this meal, before we honor his memory with stories and laughter, I want you to open them. All three of you. Right now." The room went utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Claire's confident smile faltered slightly. Thomas's casual posture stiffened. Emily's face went pale. Open them, I repeated, my voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Let's see what your father left for you. With shaking hands, my 3 children opened their envelopes and began to read. And as I watched the color drain from their faces, as I watched the horror and panic set in, I felt something I had not felt in months. I felt powerful. The reckoning had begun. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her face transforming from confusion to pure horror. Thomas's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. Emily looked like she might faint, her face ashen white, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Around the table, the other guests watched with growing concern, not yet understanding what was happening, but sensing something terrible was unfolding. Claire was the first to try to regain control. She was a lawyer, trained to think quickly under pressure. She carefully placed the papers back in the envelope and looked up at me with a forced calm that did not reach her terrified eyes. Mom, this is inappropriate. This is a private family matter that should be discussed privately, not in front of witnesses? I interrupted, my voice cutting through her practiced deflection like a knife. In front of people who have known this family for decades. In front of your pastor, your neighbors, the people who watched me raise you with love and sacrifice? I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the table, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me. No, Claire. You made this public the moment you planned to steal everything your father and I built. You made this public when you conspired with your siblings to defraud your own mother. Pastor James leaned forward, his face etched with confusion and concern. Margaret, what's going on? What are you talking about? I turned to him, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. Reverend, I'm talking about betrayal. I'm talking about my daughter Emily forging my signature and stealing over $200,000 from the accounts my husband and I spent 40 years building. I'm talking about my children plotting to put me in a nursing home so they could sell my house and divide the profits before I was even dead. Gasps echoed around the table. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. The Hendersons stared at my children with expressions of shock and disgust. Dorothy shook her head slowly, as if unable to process what she was hearing. Thomas slammed his hand on the table, his face flushing red with anger and embarrassment. This is insane. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You're grieving, and someone has been feeding you lies. Lies? My voice rose for the first time, sharp and filled with fury. These are your own words, Thomas. Your own text messages planning to sell the family business the moment I was out of the way. Do you want me to read them aloud? Mom won't last long anyway. She's already showing signs of forgetfulness. Those were your words. Thomas's face went from red to white in an instant. His wife stared at him with horror, clearly hearing these accusations for the first time. Emily was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking, unable to look at anyone. I'm sorry, she choked out between sobs. Mom, I'm so sorry. I have a problem. I was desperate. I never meant... You never meant for me to find out. I finished for her, my voice cold. You never meant to face consequences. You forged my signature, Emily. You stole from your dying father. You manipulated him when he was at his weakest, and when he discovered the truth, you let him die thinking his daughter was a thief and a liar. Emily's sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy, not anymore. Claire stood abruptly, trying to salvage whatever control she could. Enough. Mother, you're making a scene. Whatever misunderstandings... Misunderstandings? Helen's voice cut through the room like a whip. She stood from her seat, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare gaslight your mother in front of all these witnesses. We've seen every document, every email where you plan to exploit her supposed forgetfulness to control her estate. Every meeting you had with real estate developers while she was grieving. You're not just thieves, you're monsters. The pastor stood as well, his face grave and disappointed. Claire, Thomas, Emily, is this true? Did you really do these things to your own mother? The weight of his moral authority filled the room. These were not just legal accusations anymore. This was about the basic decency of how children should treat their parents. Claire's composure finally cracked. We were trying to protect the family assets. Emily made mistakes, yes, but we were trying to fix it without destroying our mother in the process. By stealing from me? I interrupted, my voice trembling with rage. By planning my future as if I were already incompetent or dead? By meeting with lawyers and developers behind my back? That's how you protect me? I looked around at each face in the room. These children have looked me in the eyes for 6 months, hugged me, ate my food, told me they loved me, all while plotting to take everything. And tonight, in this house where I raised them, where their father and I built a life of love and sacrifice, I want everyone to know exactly what kind of people they've become. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, holding it up for everyone to see. This contains copies of everything: bank records showing Emily's theft, text messages showing their conspiracy, surveillance photos of their secret meetings, all of it. And as of this morning, copies have been delivered to the district attorney's office, along with a formal complaint for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse. The room exploded with shocked murmurs. Emily's sobs turned to panicked gasps. Thomas's face went completely white. Claire stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We're your children." I met her eyes with a coldness I did not know I possessed. "You stopped being my children the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive." The days following the dinner unfolded with a swiftness that surprised even me. Daniel Morrison, my attorney, filed all the necessary legal documents within 48 hours. The evidence Richard had so meticulously gathered, combined with my own recordings from the dinner, created an ironclad case that even Claire's legal expertise could not challenge. The district attorney's office took immediate interest, particularly in Emily's forgery and theft charges, which constituted felony elder financial abuse under state law. Emily was arrested 3 days later. The sight of police cars in her driveway sent shockwaves through our small community. By the end of the week, her face was in the local newspaper under a headline that read, "Local artist charged with defrauding elderly mother." The shame was devastating and public, exactly as it should have been. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal to avoid prison time: 5 years probation, full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest, mandatory gambling addiction treatment, and 200 hours of community service. She would also have a permanent felony record, effectively ending any credibility she had in the art world. Claire faced consequences of a different kind. While she avoided criminal charges by cooperating with investigators and claiming she had only been trying to manage a difficult family situation, her involvement could not be hidden. Several of her colleagues at the law firm had been at the dinner or heard about it through the community grapevine. The State Bar Association launched a disciplinary investigation into her conduct. Though she was not disbarred, she received a formal censure and a suspension of her license for 6 months. The stain on her reputation was permanent. Clients began requesting different attorneys. Her trajectory toward partnership at the firm came to an abrupt halt. Within a year, she would leave the firm entirely, taking a lesser position at a smaller practice in another town. Thomas faced the harshest financial consequences. Daniel filed a lawsuit demanding that Thomas buy out my 50% ownership stake in the hardware business at full market value, as determined by independent auditors. Thomas had no choice but to comply or declare bankruptcy. The buyout cost him nearly $400,000, money he had to borrow against his own home and future earnings. The business that my husband and I had sacrificed to help him build would now be a millstone around his neck for years to come. Additionally, all 3 children were formally written out of my will, with the documentation carefully prepared to prevent any future legal challenges. The money from Thomas's buyout, combined with the restitution from Emily, went into an irrevocable trust I established for charitable causes, specifically organizations that helped elderly victims of financial abuse and supported women escaping exploitation. It was exactly what Richard would have wanted. Our life's work would help others who had suffered as I had suffered. As for reconciliation, my children tried. Oh, how they tried. Emily sent letters from her treatment center, pages and pages of apologies and explanations about her gambling addiction, about how she had lost control, about how she never meant to hurt me. I read the first letter, then threw the rest away unopened. Addiction might explain her actions, but it did not excuse forging my signature repeatedly or manipulating her dying father. She had made choices, and choices have consequences. Me and Thomas came to my door twice, begging to talk. The first time, I let him stand on the porch and make his case through the screen door. He claimed he had been trying to protect the family legacy, that he had made mistakes but never stopped loving me. I listened in silence, then simply said, "You had every opportunity to tell me the truth. You chose conspiracy instead. Goodbye, Thomas." The second time he came, I did not answer the door at all. Claire never came in person. She was too proud for that. Instead, she sent her husband as an emissary, asking if there was any way to repair the relationship and move forward as a family. I told him kindly but firmly, "Your wife calculated my death into her financial planning. There is no moving forward from that. Please don't come back." I sold the house 6 months later. The memories, once precious, had been poisoned by betrayal. Every room reminded me of the children I had raised there, the family dinners, the holiday celebrations, all of it now tainted by the knowledge of what they had become. I sold it to a young family with small children, and I hoped they would fill it with genuine love and loyalty, the kind I had once believed existed in my own family. I moved into a comfortable condo near Helen, close enough that we could have coffee together every morning and take walks in the park every evening. Helen became more than my sister. She became my closest friend, my confidant, my chosen family. We traveled together to places Richard and I had always dreamed of visiting, but never had the time or money for. We went to Ireland and walked the cliffs of Moher. We visited Alaska and saw glaciers that had stood for thousands of years. We drove along the coast of Maine, eating lobster rolls and watching the ocean. I also found purpose in helping others. I began volunteering at a women's shelter, specifically working with elderly women who had been financially exploited by family members. I shared my story, not for sympathy, but to show them they were not alone, that they could survive this betrayal and rebuild their lives. I taught workshops on recognizing financial abuse and protecting assets. I became an advocate, speaking at community centers and senior centers about the warning signs I had missed. One afternoon, about a year after the dinner, I sat in a small cafe near my new home, sipping tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. A young waitress, probably in her 20s, came to refill my cup and noticed the book I was reading about elder financial abuse. "Are you studying that for work?" she asked curiously. "In a way," I replied with a small smile. "I'm helping other people avoid what happened to me." She tilted her head, curious, and I gave her the short version of my story. Her eyes widened with shock and sympathy. "That's awful. I'm so sorry that happened to you, but you seem happy now?" It was phrased as a question, as if she could not quite believe someone could be happy after such betrayal. I thought about it for a moment, really considered the question. "I am happy," I finally answered, surprised to realize it was completely true. I'm free. Free from people who saw me as an obligation or an obstacle. Free from performing the role of the perfect mother for children who didn't value it. Free to live the rest of my life on my own terms. The waitress smiled, squeezed my shoulder gently and walked away. And sitting there in that moment, watching the sun set on another day of my new life, I realized something profound. At 68 years old, after losing my husband and discovering my children's betrayal, I had not been destroyed. I had been reborn. Richard's final gift to me had not been the evidence in the blue folder. It had been the truth. And the truth, painful as it was, had set me free. As I sit here today, now 69 years old and looking back on everything that happened, I want to share what I have learned from this painful journey. My story is not unique, though I wish it were. Every year, thousands of elderly parents are exploited, manipulated, and betrayed by the very children they spent their lives nurturing and protecting. The statistics are heartbreaking, but behind every number is a person like me, someone who gave everything and received betrayal in return. Family is supposed to be sacred. The bond between parent and child is supposed to be unbreakable, built on a foundation of unconditional love and mutual respect. I raised my children believing that the love I poured into them would be returned when I needed it most. I believed that the sacrifices I made, working multiple jobs, going without so they could have more, investing every ounce of my energy into their success, would mean something to them. I believed family meant loyalty. I was wrong, and that realization nearly destroyed me. But here's what I want every person watching this to understand. Being betrayed by your family does not mean you deserved it. It does not mean you failed as a parent. It does not mean you were foolish for loving unconditionally. It means that somewhere along the way, the people you loved made choices, conscious, deliberate choices, to value money over relationships, greed over gratitude, and personal gain over integrity. Those choices reflect who they became, not who you are. Greed is a poison that transforms people into strangers. It makes children look at their aging parents and see dollar signs instead of the people who changed their diapers, stayed up all night when they were sick, and sacrificed dreams to fund theirs. It turns inheritance into a countdown clock and elderly parents into obstacles to be removed. My children were not born greedy and cruel. They were shaped by choices they made when faced with temptation, debt, and opportunity. When Emily faced gambling debts, she could have come to me for help. Instead, she chose to forge and steal. When Claire and Thomas discovered her theft, they could have protected me. Instead, they chose to negotiate for their share of the profits. Richard knew something was wrong before he died, and he spent his final months trying to protect me. His last act of love was gathering evidence, documenting everything, and leaving me the tools I needed to defend myself. He could not save me from the pain of discovery, but he saved me from being destroyed by it. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give the people we love is not shelter from the storm, but the weapons they need to survive it. I want to speak directly to anyone watching this who might be in a similar situation. If you suspect your family is exploiting you, trust your instincts. That uncomfortable feeling in your gut, that sense that something is not right. Listen to it. Do not make excuses for people who are hiding things from you. Do not dismiss your own concerns because you do not want to believe the people you love could hurt you. Protect yourself first. Secure your documents. Keep your finances private. Get independent legal and financial advice from people who have no connection to your family. And if you discover betrayal, know this. You are allowed to protect yourself even from your own children. You are allowed to demand justice. You are allowed to cut toxic people out of your life, regardless of shared DNA. Forgiveness is not mandatory and reconciliation is not required. Your peace matters more than maintaining the illusion of a happy family. You have spent your life caring for others. It is not selfish to finally care for yourself. To the adult children watching this, I want to say something important. Your parents are not ATMs. Their homes are not your future vacation funds. Their final years are not an inconvenience, standing between you and an inheritance. If you cannot love and respect your parents without calculating their monetary value, then you have failed at the most basic test of human decency. And if you are currently plotting, scheming, or exploiting an elderly parent, Know that the truth always comes out eventually. When it does, you will lose far more than money. You will lose your integrity, your reputation, and any chance of peace with yourself. My children lost everything that truly mattered. They lost their mother's love and trust. They lost respect in the community that watched them grow up. They lost their father's legacy, which was not money but the example of how to live with honor and treat people with dignity. They gained some money through their schemes, but they will spend the rest of their lives knowing they are the villains in their own family story. That is a burden they will carry forever. As for me, I found something unexpected in the ashes of my old life. I found strength I did not know I had. I found freedom in letting go of people who did not value me. I found purpose in helping others who suffered similar betrayals. I found joy in living for myself instead of performing the role of the perfect mother for an audience that did not appreciate it. At 69, I am happier and more at peace than I have been in years. Richard would be proud of the woman I became after he left me the truth. So now I ask you, wherever you are watching this from, what would you do? If you opened a safe and discovered your children had been plotting against you, would you forgive them? Would you confront them publicly, as I did? Would you pursue legal action? Or would you choose a different path entirely? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and your voice could help someone else who is facing a similar situation right now. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you see your own family relationships differently, please like this video and share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who might be experiencing elder abuse and does not know how to fight back. Share it with adult children who need a wake-up call about how they treat their aging parents. Stories like mine need to be told because silence protects abusers and isolates victims. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful, true stories about resilience, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. Every story we share here is a reminder that you are not alone, that betrayal does not have to define you, and that it is never too late to stand up for yourself and demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. Remember this: never let anyone, not even family, especially not family, take advantage of your kindness. Your love is precious. Give it to people who treasure it, not to people who exploit it. And if you find yourself betrayed as I was, know that survival is possible, justice is achievable, and peace can be found on the other side of pain. Richard used to tell me that the measure of a person is not what they do when people are watching, but what they do when they think no one will ever know. My children failed that test, but I passed mine. I chose truth over comfortable lies. I chose self-respect over being a doormat. I chose justice over being a victim. And I would make the same choice again every single time. Your life is yours to protect. Your dignity is yours to defend. Never forget that.